You know, the Dutch political scene, one minute it's all tulips and windmills, and the next you've got a full-blown cabinet crisis brewing.
Yeah, it certainly can feel like a whirlwind.
So if you're feeling a bit lost with all this news about Nora Akbar's resignation,
Yeah,
don't worry, we're going to break it all down for you.
we've got a whole stack of articles and statements to go through, and we're going to unpack it all right here in this deep dive.
Right. So let's dive right in and start with the incident that kind of set this whole thing off.
Okay.
So Akbar, a junior minister from the NSC party, suddenly resigns, citing polarizing behavior within the cabinet,
Right.
particularly during those pretty intense discussions about the violence that happened at the Ajax versus Maccabi Tel Aviv football match.
Yeah. Now, what's so interesting about this resignation is that she hasn't explicitly revealed what was actually said
Right,
that prompted her to step down.
right.
Sources pointing to some potentially racist remarks that were made during a closed-door cabinet meeting.
Yeah,
But we got to be careful here.
because officially those meeting minutes are confidential, right?
Exactly. So these are really just allegations at this point.
Okay.
But there's one specific allegation that has been making headlines. Finance Minister Ilko Heinen from the VVD party
Okay.
allegedly compared anti-Semitism to pus. He said it's something that can't be squeezed out because it's everywhere.
Wow. That's a pretty loaded statement.
It is. It sparked a lot of controversy because it seems to be trivializing a really serious issue and making these broad generalizations.
Yeah, and given Akbar's background, I mean, think about how that analogy must have felt to her.
It's a good point to bring up. I mean, her personal history probably had a huge impact on how she reacted to all this.
Right?
Growing up in Morocco, witnessing poverty and injustice firsthand, and her career path first as a judge, then a lawyer, and finally a prosecutor.
Wow.
I mean, it speaks volumes about her dedication to justice and how sensitive she is to issues like discrimination.
Right. So it's probably safe to assume those alleged remarks hit a nerve, especially with her background in upholding the law. Now, to really grasp how big the situation is, let's get a clearer picture of who all is involved here.
Sure. So at the heart of this, we have Prime Minister Dick Scoof,
Right.
relatively new to the job, and now he's facing all this pressure.
Yeah.
He's leading a four-party coalition government, and things were already a bit shaky even before all of this.
Remind me again, what are the parties in this coalition and how do they all end up working together?
Okay, so we've got the PDV, VVD, NSC, and BBB.
Right.
Now, the NSC, they joined the coalition pretty reluctantly.
Yeah.
They insisted on this rule of law agreement
Okay.
to make sure things would be run ethically and democratically.
Yeah.
It's interesting because Akbar, with her legal background,
Yeah.
likely played a key role in creating that agreement. And it makes you wonder if her decision to resign stems from that agreement being broken.
That's a really good point. It adds a whole other layer to her resignation. It's not just her walking away from a job, but taking a stand for what she believes in.
Exactly.
And speaking of the NSC, there's another figure we should mention, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Former NSC leader Peter Omsic. He's recovering at home right now.
Right.
But even in his absence, he's a significant figure.
Hmm.
Omsic was actually initially against joining the coalition in the first place.
Hmm.
So his perspective on all of this, although we haven't heard it directly, carries a lot of weight within the NSC.
Okay, so we've got this fragile coalition, a controversial statement, and a minister resigning in protest. Where does all of this go from here? I mean, could this be the end of the Dutch government?
The potential consequences are pretty huge. Akbar's resignation could start a domino effect.
Yeah.
You know, it could lead other NSC members to leave too.
Right.
And if that happens, the whole coalition could collapse.
And I bet the opposition is watching all of this pretty closely.
Oh, yeah. They're definitely using this to their advantage. They're demanding that Scoof gives a full explanation. Some are even calling for him to resign. They're saying it's a major leadership failure.
Yeah.
But Scoof and the other coalition leaders, they're insisting that there wasn't any racism involved.
So we've got a he said, she said situation here.
Pretty much. And there's no clear way to know for sure what was said behind closed doors.
What about the public? Are they demanding more transparency?
Absolutely. There are a lot of people calling for the minutes of that cabinet meeting to be released.
Yeah.
But because of all the confidentiality around those discussions, it's very unlikely that that's going to happen.
So it seems like there are a lot of unanswered questions surrounding this whole crisis. So what actually happened immediately after? Did the Dutch government manage to survive?
They did, surprisingly.
Yeah.
The cabinet managed to weather the storm, for now at least.
Really? How did they pull that off?
Well, Akbar resigned, but the other NSC members, they decided to stay
Yeah.
after hours of negotiations.
Wow. That's a pretty interesting turn of events. I'm curious to know what happened in those negotiations.
Me too. And that's exactly what we'll be looking into in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore what concessions, if any, were made,
Okay.
whether this coalition can really function after all of this, and what the long-term impact might be on Dutch politics.
Sounds like we're in for another interesting conversation.
We are, picking up where we left off. Those intense negotiations that somehow managed to keep the Dutch government afloat, well, they raise a whole lot of questions about what compromises were made behind closed doors, and can this coalition really function effectively going forward?
Yeah, it feels like a temporary fix, like putting a Band-Aid on a much deeper wound. Do you think this coalition is inherently unstable even without all this recent drama?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And remember, even before this incident, the coalition had its fair share of internal conflicts. Just a few weeks ago, we saw NSC State Secretary Volker Singh resign
Oh, right.
over criticism of his financial disclosures. So this pattern suggests a deeper fragility within the coalition, and this latest incident can be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah.
Erode what little trust remained.
So if they do manage to hold on at least until the next election, what kind of lasting impact do you think this whole thing could have on the bigger political scene in the Netherlands?
It's hard to say for sure, but it'll probably fuel the polarization that's already there in Dutch society. This incident has tapped into some very sensitive nerves.
Right.
Around identity and integration and the limits of free speech and what it really means to be Dutch today. It's like all these tensions that were simmering below the surface have suddenly boiled over.
It's like Akbar's resignation has unintentionally become a symbol of these deep divisions, whether she intended that or not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can bet that political parties across the spectrum are going to try to capitalize on these divisions
Well, yeah.
to, score points and solidify their bases. We can probably expect even more heated rhetoric and finger-pointing and, a reluctance to have any kind of constructive dialogue.
It's a worrying trend because it makes it almost impossible to actually tackle those really complex societal challenges that we were just talking about.
Right.
Instead of working towards solutions, it becomes more about winning the argument no matter what the cost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we break free from this cycle of polarization? How can we have those difficult conversations about these really sensitive topics without resorting to inflammatory language or divisive tactics?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not an easy task.
No, it's not. But I think it has to start with being willing to truly listen to each other, even when, or maybe especially when we disagree.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that everyone's perspective is shaped by their own unique experiences, and those experiences are valid.
That's a crucial starting point. It's about cultivating empathy and trying to see the world through someone else's eyes, even if their view is different from your own. It's about creating a space where people feel safe to express their views, even if those views challenge the status quo.
Right.
And it's about finding that common ground, that shared humanity that connects us all.
That's beautifully put. So we have this potential for instability within the government and this broader societal polarization. How do you think this will impact the Dutch people's trust in their politicians and institutions? I mean, I imagine there's already a sense of disillusionment brewing.
Oh, there's definitely been some erosion of public trust.
Yeah.
The lack of transparency surrounding that cabinet meeting and the conflicting accounts of what was said, and this perception that politicians are more concerned with their own survival than with serving the public, it all contributes to this growing sense of cynicism and disillusionment.
It's like this invisible wall is being built between the people and their elected representatives.
Exactly. And that's a dangerous thing because it can lead to apathy and a decline in civic engagement.
Yeah.
If people lose faith in the system, they're less likely to participate,
Right.
even in things that are designed to benefit them. So the big challenge for the Dutch government now is to figure out how to rebuild that trust.
And that's going to require more than just empty promises and carefully worded statements, right?
It will. It demands concrete action and tangible steps that show they're committed to transparency and accountability and a willingness to actually listen to the people. They have to prove that they're working for the people.